We all got inspired by one or the other influential figures in martial arts. But what made those people the greatest martial artists of all time? How did they train and what did they accomplish to make them different from anyone else? This is what we are going to explore in today's video together. Hi, my name is Chris and this is the first part of my free video mini-series about the greatest martial artists of all time. We will start our journey in Kerala, India, where we find the origin of the oldest martial arts known, Kalaripayattu. The exact time of its origin, however, cannot be fixed with any sense of certainty. Some argue that in its crudest form, Kalaripayattu was a means by which the earliest inhabitants of this wooded and mountainous terrain hunted wild animals before it was refined into a systematic mode of combat that was effective enough to overpower enemies and defend themselves. Myth lovers like to believe that Kalaripayattu was a hoary past, having been introduced by Lord Parasurama, the sixth incarnation of Lord Vishnu, after he reclaimed the land of Kerala from the Arabian Sea. While historians reject such claims, there is no consensus among them either, with their pegging the time of its birth anywhere between 200 BC and 600 BC and its cresting popularity between the 14th and the 16th century. But what has never varied amidst all these claims and counterclaims is that all of which chroniclers and poets of different periods recorded the complexity of the techniques, the liquid beauty of the moves and the enviable elasticity of the practitioners of Kalaripayattu. With very little physical evidence to ascertain its point of origin, we find specific references to Kalaripayattu in songs that for a long time had only an oral tradition to speak of. It must be inferred that some form of it was taught virtually in every village in Kerala. There is frequent mention of great masters who supervised the activities of 108 Kalaris, or training centers, and there are numerous allusions to house names like Kalariparambu, openly point to the connection with this martial art. Kalaris were invariably situated near Devi temples, and the master used to be called Kurupu or Gurukal. Traditionally, expertise in Kalaripayattu has been associated with machismo, and in olden times, those who could not wield a sword were considered lacking in masculinity and hence deserved to live only like slaves. However, there are references to women warriors too who could match their male counterparts in all aspects of the martial art. During roughly the same period, we need to have a closer look of what happened in Greece now, more precise, in the sub-state of Sparta. The Spartan army was considered one of the most formidable military forces in ancient Greece. According to the ancient Greek historian Plutarch, who wrote several centuries after Sparta's heyday in 400 BC, Spartans began developing soldiers shortly after birth, when male infants were evaluated by Spartan elders. The well-built and sturdy children were allowed to live, while those who were deemed unhealthy or deformed were left at the foot of a mountain to die. At age 7, Spartan boys were turned over by their parents to the state, where they joined the Agoge, the ancient Spartan education program, which taught them the art of war. Spartan warriors were feared as the most powerful army in the Greek world, and commonly known that one Spartan was worth several men of any other state. According to Plutarch, as the young Spartans grew, they were required to exercise more and more to build their bodies. To toughen them up even more, Spartan boys were compelled to go barefoot and seldom bathed or used ointments so that their skin became hard and dry. Plutarch wrote, for clothing they were given just one cloak to wear all year round, to make them learn to endure heat and cold, and made them their own beds from plants that they had to rip out of the ground with their bare hands from riverbanks. In 480 BC, the fateful Battle of Thermopylae took place. Close to the shore of the Malayan Gulf in the Aegean Sea, a small army of 300 Spartans and a couple of Greek soldiers, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, fought against a massive Persian army, numbered anywhere from 70,000 to over 300,000 soldiers, led by King Xerxes I. The Greeks, who numbered only around 7,000 soldiers, had positioned themselves in a narrow pass called Thermopylae, which the Persians had to cross to invade Greece. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Greeks held their ground for 3 days in a row and inflicted heavy casualties on the Persians. On the 4th day, a local resident named Ephialtes betrayed the Greeks and revealed a secret path that the Persians could use to outflank them. Leonidas realized that his position was now hopeless, and he ordered most of his troops to withdraw, while he and a small group of soldiers stayed behind and fight until death. Through their rough training and dedicating their lives to the martial way, the Spartans can easily be considered some of the greatest warriors of all time. But this was not the only thing the Spartans learned in their education. Not many people know that the Spartans were also taught reading and writing skills in the Agoge, but not to the excess of other Greek states like for example the Athenians. To continue our journey, we shift our attention to early China in the 5th century. This was a time period where the world-famous Shaolin monastery has been born. By developing not only their techniques but also their body and minds, Shaolin monks are famous for withstanding extreme forces and demonstrate amazing feats such as breaking sticks and concrete with their limbs. Many Shaolin masters have won over foreign opponents from Japan, Europe and Russia, proving the effectiveness of their style. But where did the passion and willpower for their art originally come from? Although it is up to debate amongst historians, the creation of original Shaolin Kung Fu is often connected to Bodhidharma, an Indian Buddhist monk that brought Chan Buddhism to China, which later became known as Zen Buddhism in Japan. To follow the Buddhist way, he was always eager to help and encourage others on his various trips, one of which eventually led him to a monastery in China near the mountain Shao and the forest Lin. So the legend speaks. According to ancient tales, he led the seeds of Chinese martial arts in this very monastery. The Shaolin monastery, which was Taoist at the time, experienced the combination of Chan and Zen meditation practices and physical training movements. These movements then gave rise to the later Shaolin martial arts, as well as the form Shiba Luohan Shu, or the 18 hands of the Arhats. However, unlike his Shaolin successors, he taught the martial arts only as a complementary discipline to achieve enlightenment. Shaolin monks continued to train Kung Fu and practiced meditation and developing their skills even more. Outside of the monastery, we can find Kung Fu and its tournaments as well. Kung Fu fights were often held at the so-called Leitai area. This was an elevated fighting arena without railings or ropes, where often bare-knuckled and fatal matches amongst practitioners of various martial arts styles were held. Fighters would lose if they surrendered, were incapacitated, or were thrown or otherwise forced from the stage. The winner would remain on stage as its owner, unless ousted by a stronger opponent. If there were no more challengers, they would become the champion. Private duels on stage had no rules and were sometimes even fought to death. If you pay close attention, you see this detail in a lot of older Kung Fu movies. This was one of the earliest forms of what we call nowadays mixed martial arts. But we cannot talk about Kung Fu without mentioning one of the biggest names, the legendary Wong Fei-hung. Wong Fei-hung was not only the son of a famous warrior, Wong Kai-yin, but also belonged at a relatively young age to the elite unit, the 10 Tigers of Canton, which at the time provided law and order throughout southern China. He quickly became known for his exceptional skills in the southern Chinese martial art of Hungar. In addition to his martial arts training, Wong also studied Chinese medicine and became a highly skilled physician. Through his role as one of the 4 best doctors of the time, he also made a great reputation for himself as an instructor in the Chinese army. He used the shadowless kick and was an expert of using weapons such as the butterfly swords or the staff. Wong Fei-hung is most famous for defeating a group of 30 armed military men on the docks of Guangzhou with just a wooden spear. This is portrayed, for example, in one of my favorite movie series, Once Upon a Time in China. But there are many more. In fact, there are about 123 films about the legendary warrior from Canton since 1940, which only further underpins his status and reputation. This video took me literally countless of hours of researching martial arts history, scripting and editing, and I truly love what I'm doing here. And if you find this video informative and entertaining so far, I would be highly grateful for just a simple like. This is only one small click for you, but for me as a creator it means the world. And if you decide this is something you want to support for free, then there's nothing better for you to do than kick the subscribe button and explore the history of martial arts further with me. For the next step on our journey through the history of the greatest martial artists of mankind, we'll need to go back to ancient Europe. More precisely, somewhere in the 8th century in Scandinavia, Northern Europe. This is where the era of the astonishing Viking warriors began. The age of the Vikings is generally considered between 700 AD to 1100 AD, during which time they packed in an impressive amount of raiding and pillaging, developing an unrivaled reputation for bloodthirsty aggression. Indeed, the word Viking or Viking means a pirate raid in Old Norse, so it's fair to say that they were by definition a violent bunch. The Vikings trained a lot of traditional weapons such as the axe and the shield, and were feared for their mighty shield walls. With this tactic, the Vikings managed to overcome the often bigger and better equipped armies of other countries, such as Old England and France. The raiders were often equipped with leather and ordinary cloth, whereas to that time, modern England armies already had proper chainmail and lamellar armor. This forced the shield men and women to become creative in their battle strategies to eventually win over their opponents. What not many people know although is that also the Vikings had their very own martial art called Glima. It covers several types of Nordic folk wrestling practice as sport and combat. Players grip their opponent by the waist and attempt to throw them to the ground using technique rather than force. Does this ring something? Although other variants allow for more aggression as well. Similar forms of this wrestling style are also found in my home country Switzerland, where we call it Schwingen or swinging. The name most associated with the Viking attacks and raids on the British Isles is that of Ragnarr Loðbrók, who has gone down in history as a fearless leader and unstoppable warrior. Perhaps the most impressive story of Loðbrók's prowess in piracy tells of his campaign in France against the grandson of Charlemagne, Charles the Bold, in which his army was so skilled in battle against the Frankish 1st Division that the rest of King Charles' men flee. He is said to have met his end in no less dramatic fashion, thrown into a pit of venomous snakes by the king of Northumbria. Loðbrók foretold that his sons would avenge his murder by raising an army against the Anglo-Saxons, the likes of which they never had encountered. And again, we need to travel once around the whole globe to find ourselves in old Japan, somewhere between the 10th and the 16th century. Here we discover another legendary class of warriors, but they were most certainly not only equipped with just leather and cloth. In fact, quite the opposite. We talk about the legendary samurai warriors. They were highly trained in various martial arts and were skilled in both individual combat and large-scale battles. But compared to the Spartans, where the only purpose for a man was to be a warrior, the samurai were expected also to be highly skilled in the arts itself, becoming cultural and literate. This is backed by one of the sayings of that time, Bunburyodo. A rough translation of this Japanese term could be the cultural and the martial together. This concept of a man of letters as well as a military tactician or strategist is one of the samurai have espoused from their beginning. Another way of life was Bushido. The way of the warrior was one of honor, spotlighting duty to their masters and loyalty until death. Their devotion was so highly emphasized that a samurai who has lost his honor or failed his master was meant to commit a suicidal ritual known as seppuku or harakiri. Although there are many samurai throughout history which are famous for their skill in battle and strategy, but one stands out of all of them. Most of the Japanese people know Musashi Miyamoto as Japan's most famous and most skilled swordsman. His status among the Japanese has reached mythic proportions, in the same measure that Westerners would give to Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan. The life of Musashi is the gold standard for samurai in Japan. Young Musashi was born in Harima province of Japan and was raised by his mother after his father left the family when he was young. As a teenager, Musashi became a ronin, a wandering samurai without a master, and began traveling throughout Japan in search of opponents to test his swordsmanship skills. Over the course of his life, Musashi is said to have fought over 60 duels, winning all of them. He is also credited with developing the Niten-ishi Ryu style of swordsmanship, which involves the use of two swords, a long sword and a short one, simultaneously. In addition to his martial arts skills, Musashi was also a prolific writer and philosopher. He wrote several books on swordsmanship and strategies, including The Book of Five Rings, which is still studied by martial artists and business leaders today for its insights into strategy, leadership, and personal development. Despite his reputation as a fearsome warrior, Musashi is said to have been a deeply spiritual person who devoted much of his later years to meditation and contemplation. In the next episode, uploaded the following week, we are going to be looking at some of the world's biggest martial art styles nowadays and the story of their founders. For example, the history of one of the only women ever creating one of the biggest martial art styles practiced even today by millions and millions of people. Which ancient martial art is lacking in this list? Let me know in the comments. Punch hard and lift heavy.